Welcome to the DVD Shelf Movie Reviews, where movies are celebrated, not incinerated.
Would you like to ski Antarctica? But you're snowed under with work? Do you dream of a vacation at the bottom of the ocean? But you can't float the bill? Have you always wanted to climb the mountains of Mars? But now you're over the hill? Then come to Recall Incorporated, where you can buy the memory of your ideal vacation cheaper, safer, and better than the real thing. So don't let life pass you by. Call Recall for the memory of a lifetime.
Before The Matrix or The Bourne Identity, before Inception or Memento, before Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind or even Mr. and Mrs. Smith, there was Total Recall.
No shit.
By the year 2084, humans have colonized the planet Mars. However, a history of greed and corruption brought on by the colony's evil chief administrator Velos Cohagen has sparked an uprising against his unjust rule. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the spin that the news media puts on the Mars conflict is making this band of freedom fighters look like a league of violent terrorists. While on Earth, we meet average Joe construction worker Douglas Quaid, portrayed by pop culture icon Arnold Schwarzenegger. Quaid lives a happy but boring life and yearns for something more. Unfazed by the bloodshed occurring on the Red Planet, Quaid dreams of turning over a new leaf by moving to the Mars colony with his beautiful and loving wife Lori, played by Sharon Stone. Quaid soon finds out about Recall, a company with the technology to implant fabricated memories, creating fully immersive virtual reality mind trips for its customers. Intrigued, Quaid signs up for a Recall vacation package that will send him on a 2-week-long mental trip to Mars. But to get a true adventure out of this subconscious sabbatical, he agrees to take on the identity of a Mars secret agent. But once he enters the special mind-altering machine, everything instantly goes haywire. Suddenly, Quaid is being targeted by Cohagen's men, and now he can't quite remember whether he really is a Mars secret agent with a mysterious past, or still just an everyday construction worker. Now it's up to Quaid to remember what's reality and what's fantasy in order to unlock the key that will save himself and the people of Mars from the monstrous leadership of Velos Cohagen. I'm David Roche, your host of the DVD Shelf Movie Reviews, and today I'm recalling the original Total Recall, the trippy early 90s sci-fi action-adventure that starred Arnold Schwarzenegger during the peak of his worldwide popularity. And if you're looking for those truly classic Arnold-isms, then look no further than this.
Do you think this is the real Quaid? It is. Don't bullshit me. Come on, Cohagen, you got what you want. Give these people air.
What are you, my father?
If I'm not me, who the hell am I? Sue me, dickhead.
You blew my cover!
Get out!
Screw you!
And even though this really is an Arnold movie, it wouldn't quite be the same if it hadn't been for the twisted vision of famed Dutch director Paul Verhoeven, the mastermind behind other sci-fi cult classics such as Robocop and Starship Troopers. In this episode, we'll celebrate this classic that is equal parts thrilling, gory, and goofy, and see what makes it such a beloved and memorable special effects blockbuster.
Bullshit.
We'll touch on Total Recall's story roots, how influential the film ended up becoming for the sci-fi genre, and much more, before I delve into the recently released Mind-Bending Edition Blu-ray. Then as always, I'll give the Blu-ray my final recommendation based on this rating scale, which ranges from 1 disc being just downloaded, all the way to 5 discs being a must-own movie. So let's not waste any time.
Get your ass to Mars.
This is Total Recall. Directed by Paul Verhoeven and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rachel Ticotin, Sharon Stone, Michael Ironside, and Ronnie Cox. It was released theatrically by Carolco Pictures and TriStar Pictures on June 1st, 1990. The standard DVD was first released on June 18th, 1997, the original Blu-ray was released on August 29th, 2006, and the special Mind-Bending Edition Blu-ray was released on July 31st, 2012. Total Recall originated inside the eccentric mind of legendary science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. During his brief tenure at the University of California, Berkeley in the late 1940s, Dick found himself fascinated with philosophy and became a true believer in how our physical world wasn't completely real in an objective sense, and that it only truly existed through our own experiences within it. Perhaps our world only exists through our own perceptions of it, with the possibility of other worlds being out there that we simply aren't cognizant of. Or maybe, what we believe to be real is simply just a construction or an illusion brought on by some outside entity. Or maybe This is just some really good shit. Philip K. Dick's philosophical outlooks became the signature themes that would define his body of work. Starting in the 1950s, Philip K. Dick began writing full-time. However, he remained living nearly the rest of his life in poverty due to his literary works not quite finding mainstream success. His stories stayed mostly in the realm of science fiction and contained ideas that were truly ahead of their time. Even though Philip K. Dick won literary awards and was held in high regard within the science fiction genre, there still wasn't a huge public interest in it at the time, so much of his work ended up in obscurity. And sadly, like so many great artists and writers, Dick's work went unnoticed for many years until it was too late for him to finally enjoy the fruits of his labor. During his career, Dick published nearly 40 novels and over 120 short stories, including the strangely titled We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, which was a short story published in the April 1966 issue of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. The story featured ordinary guy Douglas Quail, who dreams of taking a trip to the planet Mars. He arrives at Recall Inc. to purchase false memories that'll make him believe that he had taken a 2-week vacation to Mars. This leads to a malfunction where he slowly begins to remember that he is an actual secret agent who has been to Mars. This concept ends up being pretty faithfully adapted in Total Recall, but the majority of the short story is really just the jumping off point for the action in the film version. Many of Philip K. Dick's concepts and ideas have either been borrowed by others time and time again, or his novels and short stories have had literal adaptations of their own. In 1982, director Ridley Scott followed up his hit sci-fi horror film Alien with an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's 1968 novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Another eclectic title that doesn't quite work for a big-budget Hollywood production, so the name of the film was changed to Blade Runner. The futuristic sci-fi thriller starred Harrison Ford and was initially a box office failure. However, with its dark, bleak, and rainy production design inspiring the looks of countless films to follow, Blade Runner has since become one of the most revered and influential science fiction films of all time. Before production, Blade Runner's screenplay went through many rewrites during the 1970s, with Philip K. Dick never really approving of any of them. But once he saw some early test footage that reflected his own idea of how the story would look visually, he was blown away and began heavily supporting the film. However, less than 4 months before the release of Blade Runner, 53-year-old Philip K. Dick left our dimension on March 2, 1982 after suffering a series of strokes that culminated in heart failure, which was likely a result from a life riddled with drug addiction. He never did get to see the final theatrical cut of Blade Runner. Blade Runner incorporates so many ideas that it may require multiple viewings to fully absorb and appreciate, which is probably why its initial audience and critical reception was so polarizing. And that's what makes Blade Runner fit right into Philip K. Dick's overall legacy of being underappreciated during its time, but has since gone on to be highly influential. Not only has a number of Dick's unreleased writings gone on to receive posthumous publications, but several have gone on to become film adaptations, some of them very successful, others not so much. Several of the more prominent Philip K. Dick adaptations include Minority Report starring Tom Cruise, Paycheck with Ben Affleck, The Adjustment Bureau starring Matt Damon, and A Scanner Darkly, an ambitious effort that incorporated a unique process of animating every frame by hand on top of filmed footage. But it was in 1990 that one of Philip K. Dick's most successful adaptations was released and became a hit both critically and commercially after having spent over a decade in development hell. In fact, it was way back in 1974 that the rights to the short story were originally optioned from Philip K. Dick by Alien screenwriters Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, who went on to write the original screenplay with writer John Pavel for what would later become known as Total Recall. The original screenplay drafts retain Philip K. Dick's story of regular guy Douglas Quail visiting Recall Inc. Over the years, the Total Recall project was unable to obtain financial backers, so it was put on hiatus until it caught the eye of legendary producer Dino De Laurentiis. Jeff Bridges was once attached to star as Douglas Quail after playing the lead role in the De Laurentiis-produced 1976 remake of King Kong. Later, Jaws frontman Richard Dreyfuss was also attached to Total Recall, as well as up-and-coming leading man Patrick Swayze. A handful of directors were considered to helm Total Recall, most notably Videodrome and Scanners director David Cronenberg, who had written several drafts for the film himself. It was originally Cronenberg's idea to include a race of clairvoyant mutants on Mars that were disfigured from the deadly Martian atmosphere. During his attachment to the project, Cronenberg campaigned for actor William Hurt to star as Douglas Quail. In 1984, Dino De Laurentiis' production company released the science fiction epic Dune, directed by David Lynch. After Dune became a huge financial disaster, De Laurentiis' company went bankrupt and was forced to forfeit the movie rights for Total Recall. Enter Austrian bodybuilder and rising movie star Arnold Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger, who at one point had campaigned to play the role of Quail in Total Recall, brought in Carol Co. Pictures, a production company that previously financed Schwarzenegger's ultra-popular starring vehicle, The Terminator. Schwarzenegger persuaded Carol Co. to buy the rights for Total Recall from De Laurentiis, and once they acquired the project, Schwarzenegger was able to negotiate a $10 million salary plus 15% of the film's box office gross, along with a heavy amount of creative control.
And then I get this call from Arnold, and he says, "Ron," he said, "get ready, pack your bags, we go. We're going to make the movie." I said, "What movie?" He says, "Isn't there a movie you've been trying to make for about 10 years? I said, "Oh, it's in bankruptcy." He said, "Well, I just took it out. Back up. We're making the movie right away." And that was it.
Let's do it.
Do what?
Move to Mars.
Director Paul Verhoeven was born in Amsterdam, Netherlands, and became a successful and award-winning film and television director in his native country. Many of his projects starred his friend and fellow native, Rutger Hauer, who just so happened to later achieve success here in the US by famously playing the villainous android Roy Batty in Blade Runner. As a child, Verhoeven loved consuming comic books and science fiction novels and movies, but as he grew up, he started to look at most of them as nonsense and became disinterested with the genre, aside from an event film like the original Star Wars, which he had much admiration for. Ironically, Verhoeven would later go on to re-embrace his childhood love for science fiction, which is what would help him find success here in the United States. Paul Verhoeven would direct his first American-produced film in 1985 called Flesh and Blood, a period piece that starred Rutger Hauer and Jennifer Jason Leigh. He soon moved to Hollywood to find more opportunities that would help grow his filmmaking career. He was given a script for a project in development that was inspired in part by comic book hero Judge Dredd and also by concepts from Blade Runner. The project, called Robocop, was a futuristic sci-fi tale about a gunned-down good guy cop who is reborn as an indestructible cybernetic superhero.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
When I got finally that script of Robocop and I read it, I thought it was extremely silly and stupid. I threw it on the floor and saying, "I'm not going to shoot this kind of rubbish." My wife picked up that script Robocop and read it. And she said, "You know, yeah, this is perhaps not, it's not Shakespeare, but it is a script with more layers than you think."
Paul Verhoeven came to the realization that it might be a fun and crazy experience to inject his European sensibility into an American superhero story, so he signed on. The film starred Peter Weller as the law-enforcing cyborg, Nancy Allen as a fellow cop, That 70s Show's Kurtwood Smith as a ruthless crime boss, and character actor Ronnie Cox, who went from being known as a likable guy in his previous films to a memorably sleazy and corrupt senior president of a mega corporation that's responsible for building deadly patrol machines meant to overthrow Detroit's police force. Despite its R rating and heavy violence, Robocop was a big hit at the box office when it was released in the summer of 1987. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was actually considered for the lead role at one point, loved Robocop and met with Paul Verhoeven where he insisted that they work together on a future project. Paul Verhoeven's success with Robocop made him the obvious choice to direct another special effects heavy sci-fi blockbuster, and with Schwarzenegger loving the film, he personally hired Verhoeven to take on Total Recall. Once again, Verhoeven was hesitant about doing another science fiction story. By the time he had read the script, it had already gone through over 40 draft rewrites, yet he was left unsatisfied with the third act of the film. He fell in love with the first two acts that brought all the mind-bending and thought-provoking concepts to the table, but felt that it crumbled under its own weight towards the end, becoming another typical action flick. Verhoeven brought in Big Trouble in Little China scribe Gary Goldman to punch up the script a bit. Goldman decided to add another twist where Douglas Quail had been in cahoots with the villainous Cohaagen the entire time. Also, since our current vice president at the time was Dan Quayle, the screenwriters decided to change the main character's name from Quail to Quaid.
I am Quaid.
By now, Verhoeven loved the script and was fascinated with the philosophical story ideas so much that he didn't mind helming another science fiction action adventure. In fact, Verhoeven brought back much of his crew that worked on Robocop, including makeup effects artist Rob Bottin, who was once a protege under Academy Award-winning effects artist Rick Baker, assisting him with creating makeup effects for films like Star Wars and the King Kong 70s remake. Bottin had since made a name for himself, however, creating unforgettable makeup and prosthetic effects for films like John Carpenter's The Thing, Twilight Zone the movie, The Howling, and Legend. One of Rob Bottin's most notoriously nasty sequences from Robocop was the job he did on actor Paul McCrane when his skin is melting off due to an exposure to toxic waste just before he is splattered onto the windshield of a speeding car. Bottin was now brought on to do some equally strange effects work for Total Recall, and seemed to be having a ball designing what would become some pretty unforgettable imagery, including the famous breakaway fat lady disguise worn by Quaid, the extraction of the tracking device, the tragically disfigured mutants, the horrific and cartoonish result from being exposed to Mars's vacuum-like atmosphere, and probably the film's most talked about effect, the triple-breasted prostitute. With Arnold Schwarzenegger bringing his famously imposing physique to the role of Douglas Quaid, he and Verhoeven agreed that audiences wouldn't believe that his character starts out as a weak, pushover accountant, so they turned Quaid into a blue-collar construction worker. Additionally, Verhoeven was 100% aware of Arnold's limited range as an actor, and figured that instead of attempting to make a dark and gritty film with Arnold's stifle set of acting chops, why not just make it more of a goofy and lighthearted romp that captures Arnold's intensity and screen presence, but doesn't bother to force out a serious performance that he knew he wouldn't get. And that's what makes watching Total Recall so much damn fun. Verhoeven knew that he didn't have a Jeff Bridges or a Richard Dreyfuss to maybe make a more straightforward film, and he also knew that Arnold wasn't really famous for being a trained actor. Aside from his stature, Arnold Schwarzenegger became the superstar he did because of his charisma. The same charisma that won him a 2-term run as governor of California.
California.
Oh, sorry. California. In Total Recall, Arnold's in on the joke, but the earnestness in his performance makes it seem as if he isn't.
I feel like I was meant for something more than this.
The film is campy and ridiculous on purpose, but at the same time, you're constantly guessing what's going to happen next with all the crazy story turns and plot twists.
Would you please repeat the destination?
Shit!
I'm not familiar with that address.
Verhoeven made the smart choice to not take Arnold's performance too seriously, even though to ultimately get what he needed out of Arnold, many takes had to be filmed to at least get something usable. But according to Verhoeven, Arnold couldn't have been more of a loyal and supportive collaborator. Yeah, if you want loyalty, just ask Maria Shriver.
Consider that a divorce.
Playing Quaid's backstabbing wife was up-and-coming actress Sharon Stone, who we famously saw much more of in Paul Verhoeven's next film, Basic Instinct. Verhoeven brought back Ronnie Cox from Robocop to play another corrupt corporate bigwig in the role of Vilos Cohagen, the oppressive governor of the Mars colony. Michael Ironside brings an intense performance to Cohagen's right-hand man, Richter, and Rachel Ticotin plays the proverbial hooker with a heart of gold who fights alongside the resistance against Cohagen.
What a bitch.
Due to the enormous scope and specific locations needed for the project, Paul Verhoeven filmed Total Recall in and around Mexico City, either inside large local sound stages, within the actual Mexican public subway system, or on massive red dirt mountains that simulated the stark red Martian terrain.
The choice of going to Mexico City was a great choice because the architecture in Mexico City is unlike anything else.
We found architecture that's called New Brutalism. It was a very dark, a bit heavy-handed, concrete style that gave the movie a very definite architectural production design.
But filming in Mexico City plagued the production with the dreaded Montezuma's Revenge, where nearly every single cast and crew member would be ill for days at a time, from either food poisoning or from drinking the heinous tap water. The only crew member who never got sick was screenwriter-producer Ronald Schwarzenegger, who requested a weekly vitamin B12 injection and only brushed his teeth with boiled tap water. After falling ill while filming Predator in Mexico only a few years earlier, Arnold Schwarzenegger knew to avoid the virus by hiring his own personal chef. But once the chef became sick, Arnold was forced to eat the normal food and soon contracted the illness himself. Once filming wrapped, post-production began. Nearly all of the special effects seen in the film were either optically composited or simply done in camera. Having been made just before computer-generated effects completely consumed filmmaking, the only digitally created elements were the skeletons seen through the security X-ray machine. Nowadays, the effect does look a little rough, but certainly not so jarring that it takes you out of the movie. But everything else is completely practical, from the large background matte paintings, to the miniatures, to the special makeup and puppet effects. And also, the set design. I kinda like the almost claustrophobic sense you get while in the Mars colony. Obviously, they were only limited to the studio space they shot in, but it makes perfect sense that there would be this closed-in feeling to a settlement and tunnel system that's been carved out of a planet. I also love the dirtiness and grittiness to the production design. Like many science fiction films of the post-Star Wars era, the sets all have a real lived-in feel. There's an age to everything, and it's created with tangible materials, not just one big green screen. Seriously, this whole fad of overusing green screen is getting a bit tired. Ignore that? Rounding out the film, we have a classic score composed and conducted by the late Jerry Goldsmith, which successfully blends an electronic science fiction sound with large booming action cues. Initially, the original cut of Total Recall was so violent and gory that it received an X rating. The film had to be trimmed of some of the really over-the-top violent scenes, camera angles had to be changed to hide certain things, and cuts had to be quicker to conceal some of the more disturbing imagery. Still, after being cut for an R rating, it's a pretty violent film with gore that rivals many horror movies, and it's pretty crazy to look back on it now and to see how much bizarre imagery they were able to get away with in a big summer blockbuster. But in June of 1990, this perfect storm of groundbreaking effects, great story, and fun atmosphere made Total Recall a total hit with audiences and critics alike.
You got a lot of nerve showing your face around here, Hauser.
Look who's talking.
With a production budget of $65 million, the film went on to gross over $260 million worldwide. Arnold Schwarzenegger's already global celebrity status was kicked up a few more notches by Total Recall's staggering success that merely set the stage for his starring role in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which was released the following summer and became the highest grossing film up to that point. But that seems to be an ongoing trend with James Cameron's movies. With the combined efforts of the visual effects team, the miniature set photography, the digital artists, and Rob Bottin's makeup work, Total Recall went on to receive a rare Special Achievement Oscar for special effects at the 63rd Annual Academy Awards. Hoping he wouldn't be typecast as strictly a science fiction director, Paul Verhoeven took a break from the genre following his 1-2 punch success from Robocop and Total Recall. He went on to direct Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas in the erotic thriller Basic Instinct in 1992, and later directed the notoriously awful NC-17 rated box office bomb Showgirls in 1995. Basic Instinct became a huge hit. In fact, it was one of the most financially successful films of the decade, mainly due to all the controversy surrounding its shocking and graphic portrayals of sex and violence. But Showgirls later became one of the biggest financial busts in history due to a large budget mixed with poor ticket sales. Verhoeven decided to give science fiction another shot when he directed the cult classic alien invasion film Starship Troopers in 1997, then going on to direct the sci-fi thriller Hollow Man starring Kevin Bacon. Released in 2000, Hollow Man became Paul Verhoeven's final American-produced film before moving back to the Netherlands. He's since only directed one film in his native country, but has attached himself to a couple possible future projects. With Total Recall being as big as it was, talks of a sequel are always inevitable. Total Recall 2 was put into the works and would have again starred Schwarzenegger as Douglas Quaid, only now he'd be a reformed law enforcer working at a specialized police force called Pre-Crime. For the story, the screenwriters went back and adapted another Philip K. Dick short story, The Minority Report, which he wrote back in 1956 and tells of a future where 3 mutants possess the ability to look ahead in time, allowing the police to stop crimes before they happen. The story was in no way related to Dick's story that inspired Total Recall, but the screenwriters decided to connect it to the events from the original Total Recall as a sequel where several of the disfigured mutant clairvoyants on Mars could see future crimes.
Do you want to know the future?
The film obviously never came into fruition, but its script was kept up in the air for several years as drastic rewrites were made to it, where it later just became a standalone film. It was then that director Steven Spielberg got a hold of it and turned it into the wildly successful 2002 box office smash Minority Report starring Tom Cruise. In 1999, a Total Recall TV series was put into production in Canada. Total Recall 2070 was meant to be a prequel of sorts to the film, but the visual style seemed to echo Blade Runner more than it did Verhoeven's Total Recall, and none of the original characters are there to connect the show to the film. The series originally ran for 22 episodes on Canada's CHCH-TV before running on Showtime and in network syndication in the US. In 2011, the continuity of the original movie was continued in a short run of Total Recall comic books published by Dynamite Comics. And of course, that brings us to the recently released Total Remake starring Colin Farrell, which, ironically, was produced by a company called Original Film. I decided to go ahead and check out the remake instead of just blindly discounting it, but yeah. Look, I can't call this film a disappointment because that would mean that I was actually expecting something. Based on the trailers, it looked like they just took a darker, glossier, lens flare heavy approach to the original. And the trailers didn't lie. If you've seen the original, then you'd probably come out from watching this one with your eyes stuck in the back of your head from rolling them so much. Nearly every story point from the original is used here, only to avoid making the exact same film again. They create these ridiculous and mostly superficial ways of altering some things ever so slightly, like mashing a couple characters into one or restructuring the same basic plot twists. But the results still leave you with a heavy feeling of déjà vu. And when you stack up all the tweaking to the story, settings, and characters, the big picture ends up making very little sense when compared to the original's tighter presentation. So I'm sure you're asking, why compare it to the original? Why not just let the film speak for itself? Well, as it turns out, it would seem that the filmmakers kinda want you to compare it to the original. Again, there's really no originality being brought to the table here. It's all just sort of a companion piece that requires a viewing of the first movie to really get anything out of it. For example, there are several little obvious nods to the original film, which comes off as saying, well, we all grew up with the original, and we want to pay homage to a clearly better film. Most notably, the three-boobed prostitute, where, in the original, we assume she has 3 breasts from being a Martian mutant. But in this version, we don't even leave Earth, and there are no mutants. So can someone please tell me why this woman would have 3 boobs? They knew they had to include her just to appease the fans of the original, but it makes zero sense in context. I'm guessing the only reason that could validate a remake is the shallow notion of the special effects now looking outdated. But because the remake sticks so close to the first movie's plot and ideas, it would seem that the filmmakers are aware that it's a story that still holds up. And besides, all the digital effects make this look like something we've seen 1,000 times before in modern sci-fi movies, whereas the ambitious special effects in the original help it stand out, not to mention receiving Oscar wins. In a nutshell, it's just bland, yet all too familiar, which I guess is fitting for a movie about memory loss. So combined with this and my disliking of last year's Fright Night remake from a few episodes ago, it might sound like I have something against Colin Farrell, which isn't the case. I think he's actually a pretty decent actor in the right films, but these remakes just aren't doing him any favors. So with that, let me suggest that instead of going out and spending your hard-earned cash on a ticket to see the remake, save your dough for this mind-bending edition Blu-ray release of the original, because as I'm recording this, they're surprisingly about the same price. First off, here in the US, there already was a bare-bones Blu-ray of Total Recall that was released way back in 2006, but it caused a stir among fans for its poor and grainy picture quality. On top of that, it was completely void of all the special features that were included on an older DVD release. But thankfully, what the new remake did accomplish was that it inspired the studio to re-release the original on Blu-ray, where they took the original film negative and created an all-new and beautiful HD picture transfer that received a seal of approval by Paul Verhoeven. The difference in picture quality is astonishing, and you can tell that the makers of the Blu-ray were proud of themselves since they went so far as to include a side-screen comparison of picture quality as one of the special features. Additional special features include a classic feature-length audio commentary from Paul Verhoeven and Arnold Schwarzenegger that was previously featured on the 2001 special edition DVD release, and is famous for Arnold simply describing the movie and pointing out obvious things.
I continuously used him as a human shield, never threw him down the escalator.
Little detail I added.
Yeah. No regard for human life.
A battle of the European accents that's definitely a must-listen. Also, we get a more recent interview with director Paul Verhoeven, where he goes into great detail about the film's development and production, a vintage featurette that was likely used as a promotional piece for the film's original release, a half-hour making-of documentary, a special effects documentary, the theatrical trailer, and a photo gallery.
See you at the party, Richter!
Total Recall is fun, pure and simple. Disguised within a wonderfully campy action shoot-'em-up and a memorably over-the-top Schwarzenegger performance is a smart science fiction concept that has gone on to predate many similar sci-fi related ideas that we tend to take for granted nowadays. Its clever usage of practical effects created some ridiculously sick and twisted imagery that will stick inside your head long after the movie is over. and it's no doubt unlike anything we've ever seen or will ever see again, even from a remake of the same story. It doesn't take itself so damn seriously like the new one does, and because of that, it ends up being the more entertaining of the two. And aside from the first two Terminator films, it's easily one of Arnold Schwarzenegger's greatest projects. While it may not be perfect and some of you out there probably can't get past some of the acting or dated special effects, all the elements add up to create a bizarre classic that might actually make you think a little bit. Plus, the new Blu-ray is certainly worth its relatively cheap sticker price for a hearty helping of special features and its pristine picture quality. Now, I haven't done a rating quite like this before, but the movie itself I would rate as a 4 out of 5 discs recommendation. But this was such a long-awaited and well-done Blu-ray release for the movie that it boosts the entire Total Recall package up to a 5 out of 5 discs recommendation. This is a must-own movie.
I'm honored.
Well, that'll about do it for today.
Hell of a day, isn't it?
Thanks for joining me on this journey to the core of this sci-fi classic. Be sure to stop by HappyDragonPictures.com for more videos and reviews, and stay tuned, because the next full episode of the DVD Shelf movie reviews will easily be the biggest and most epic one yet.
I'll blow this place up and be home in time for cornflakes.
So I'll see you then. But for now, this one's going back on the DVD Shelf.
We hope you enjoyed the ride.